All right, boys and girls, it's time for some more Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. As you can see, I am now working from home. I have a little office set up here. So I am absolutely representing my house. So, ow to all my revere peeps out there. All right, so when we left off, they were reading the tea leaves in the cup. I don't think it looks like a Grimm, she said flatly. Professor Trelawney surveyed Hermione with mounting dislike. You'll forgive me for saying so, my dear, but I perceive very little aura around you, very little receptivity to the renaissances of the future. Seamus Finnegan was tilting his head from side to side. It looks like a Grimm if you do this, he said, with his eyes almost shut. But it looks more like a donkey from here, he said, leaning to the left. When you've all finished deciding whether I'm going to die or not, said Harry, taking himself by surprise. Now nobody seemed to want to look at him. I think we will leave the lesson here for today, said Professor Trelawney in her mistiest voice. Yes, please pack away your things. Silently, the class took their teacups back to Professor Trelawney, packed away their books, and closed their bags. Even Ron was avoiding Harry's eyes. Until we meet again, said Professor Trelawney faintly. Fair fortune be yours. Oh, and dear, she pointed at Neville, you'll be late next time, so mind you, work extra hard to catch up. Harry, Ron, and Hermione descended the Professor Trelawney's ladder and the winding stair in silence, then set off for Professor McGonagall's Transfiguration lesson. It took them so long to find her classroom that, as early as they had left divination, they were only just in time. Harry chose a seat right at the back of the room, feeling as though he were sitting in a very bright spotlight. The rest of the class kept shooting furtive glances at him, as though he were about to drop dead at any moment. He hardly heard what Professor McGonagall was telling them about animagi, wizards who could transform at will into animals, and wasn't even watching when she transformed herself right in front of their eyes into a tabby cat with spectacle markings around her eyes. Really? What has gotten into all today? Said Professor McGonagall, turning back into herself with a faint pop and staring around at them all. Not that it matters, but that's the first time my transfigurations have not gotten applause from a class. Everybody's head turned towards Harry again, but nobody spoke. Hermione raised her hand. Please, Professor. We've just had our first divination class, and we were reading the tea leaves, and... of course, said Professor McGonagall, suddenly frowning. There's no need to say any more, Miss Granger. Tell me, which of you will be dying this year? Everyone stared at her. Me, said Harry. I see, said Professor McGonagall, fixing Harry with her beady eyes. Then you should know, Potter, that Sybil Trelawney has predicted the death of one student a year since she arrived at this school. None of them have died yet. Seeing death omens is her favorite way of greeting a new class. If it were not for the fact that I never speak ill of my colleagues... Professor McGonagall broke off, and they saw that her nostrils had gone white. She went on more calmly. Divination is one of the most imprecise branches of magic. I shall not conceal from you that I have very little patience with it. True seers are very rare, and Professor Trelawney... She stopped again and then said in a very matter-of-fact tone, You look in excellent health to me, Potter, so you will excuse me if I don't let you off homework today. I assure you that if you die, you need not hand it in. Hermione laughed. Harry felt a bit better. It was harder to feel scared of a lump of tea leaves away in the dim red light and befuddling perfume of Trelawney's classroom. Not everyone was convinced, however. Ron still looked worried, and Lavender whispered, But what about Neville's cup? When the Transfiguration class had finished, they joined the crowd thundering toward the Great Hall for lunch. Ron, cheer up, said Hermione, pushing a dish of stew toward him. You heard what Professor McGonagall said. Ron spooned stew onto his plate and picked up his fork, but didn't start. Harry, he said in a low, serious voice, you haven't seen a great black dog anywhere, have you? Yeah, I have, said Harry. I saw one the night I left the Dursleys. Ron let his fork fall with a clatter. Probably a stray, said Hermione calmly. Ron looked at Hermione as though she had gone mad. Hermione, if Harry's seen a Grim, that's bad, he said. My Uncle Billis, he saw one, and he died 24 hours later. Coincidence, said Hermione airily, pouring herself some pumpkin juice. You don't know what you're talking about, said Ron, starting to get angry. Grims scare the living daylights out of most wizards. There you are then, said Hermione in a superior tone. They see the Grim and die of fright. The Grim's not an omen. It's the cause of death. And Harry's still with us because he's not stupid enough to see one and think, right, well, I'd better kick the bucket then. Ron mouthed wordlessly at Hermione, who had opened her bag, took out her new arithmancy book, and propped it open against the juice jug. I think divination seems very woolly, she said, searching for her page. A lot of guesswork, if you ask me. There was nothing woolly about the Grim in that cup, Ron said hotly. You didn't seem so confident when you were telling Harry it was a sheep, said Hermione coolly. Professor Trelawney said you didn't have the right aura. You don't like being bad at something for a change. He had touched a nerve. Hermione slammed her arithmancy book down on the table so hard that bits of meat and carrot flew everywhere. If being good at divination means I have to pretend to see death omens and lumps of tea leaves, I'm not sure I'll be studying it much longer. That lesson was absolute rubbish compared with my arithmancy class. She snatched up her bag and stalked away. Ron frowned at her. What's she talking about? He said to Harry. She hasn't been to arithmancy class yet. Harry was pleased to get out of the castle after lunch. Yesterday's rain had cleared, the sky was clear, pale gray, and the grass was springy and damp underfoot as they set off for their first ever Care of Magical Creatures class. Ron and Hermione weren't speaking to each other. Harry walked beside them in silence as they went down the sloping lawns to Hagrid's hut on the edge of the Forbidden Forest. It was only when he spotted only two familiar black backs ahead of them that he realized they must be having these lessons with the Slytherins. Malfoy was talking animatedly to Crabbe and Goyle, who were chortling. Harry was quite sure he knew what they were talking about. Hagrid was waiting for his class at the door of his hut. He stood in his moleskin overcoat with Fang the boarhound at his heels, looking impatient to start. Come on, now get a move on, he called as the class approached. Got a real treat for you today. Great lesson a-coming up. Everyone here, right, follow me. For one nasty moment, Harry thought that Hagrid was going to lead them into the forest. Harry had had enough of unpleasant experiences in there to last him a lifetime. However, Hagrid strolled around to the edge of the trees, and 5 minutes later, they found themselves outside a kind of paddock. There was nothing in there. Everyone, gather round the fence here, he called. That's it. Make sure you can see. Now, first thing you'll want to do is to open your books. How? Said the cold, drawling voice of Malfoy. Said Hagrid. How do we open our books? Malfoy repeated. He took out his copy of the Monster Book of Monsters, which he had bound shut with a length of rope. Other people took theirs out too. Some, like Harry, had belted their book shut. Others had crammed them inside tight bags or clamped them together with binder clips. Hasn't anybody been able to open their books? Said Hagrid, looking crestfallen. The class all shook their heads. You've got to stroke 'em, said Harry, as though this was the most obvious thing in the world. Look. He took Hermione's copy, ripped off the sellotape that bound it. The book tried to bite, but Hagrid ran a giant forefinger down its spine, and the book shivered. and then fell open and lay quietly in his hands. "Oh, how silly we've all been," sneered Malfoy. "We should have stroked them. Why didn't we guess?" I thought they were funny," Hagrid said uncertainly to Hermione. "Oh, tremendously funny," said Malfoy. "Really witty, giving us books that try to rip our hands off." "Shut up, Malfoy," said Harry quietly. Hagrid was looking downcast, and Harry wanted Hagrid's first lesson to be a success. "Right then," said Hagrid, who seemed to have lost his thread. So you got your books and now you need the magical creatures. Yeah. So I'll go and get them. Hang on." He strode away from them into the forest and out of sight. "Gah, this place is going to the dogs," said Malfoy loudly. "That oath teaching classes, my father'll have a fit when I tell him." "Shut up, Malfoy," Harry repeated. "Careful, Potter. There's a Dementor behind you." "Ooh," squealed Lavender Brown, pointing toward the opposite side of the paddock. Trotting toward them were a dozen of the most bizarre creatures Harry had ever seen. They had the bodies and hind legs and tails of horses, but the front legs, wings, and heads of what seemed to be giant eagles, with cruel, steely-colored beaks and large, brilliantly orange eyes. The talons on their front legs were 1/2 foot long and deadly looking. Each of the beasts had thick leather collars around its neck, which was attached to a long chain, and the ends of all of these were held in the vast hands of Hagrid, who came jogging into the paddock behind the creatures. All right, so we are all done today. Tomorrow we'll find out more about these magical creature lessons from Hagrid. I hope you guys all have an awesome day today. Remember, don't forget to be awesome. It's super important, even at home. Make sure you're super awesome at home. Be safe, stay healthy, and remember, I love you.